It all started with a very simple idea. Tell the stories of how successful middle market CEOs made it to the corner office. I'm Brant Handley, founder and managing director of Resource Options International, or ROI. We're the USA's premier executive search firm focused exclusively on empowering middle market companies to attract, hire, and retain A players while transforming top executives' careers and lives. ROI's Into the Corner office is dedicated to discovering how middle market CEOs advance their career, and we're making these remarkable and sometimes quite unbelievable stories available to you for the very first time. Listen and learn about the challenges they've overcome, the interesting people they've met along the way, and the lessons learned that steered these executives' unique journey into a middle market corner office of their own. I know you enjoy these CEO stories as much as I've enjoyed recording them, so thank you for listening today, and if you like what you've heard, rate us on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts. I'm looking forward to you joining me on the next great middle market CEO adventure into the corner office. Today, my guest is Ken Reali, a 3-time MedTech CEO and currently a co-founder and owner with his wife, Kristen, of Reali Family Vineyards, following a successful MedTech career for the better part of the last 30 years. As a CEO for 13 years in 3 different companies, Ken has gained experience driving strategies to build shareholder value. He has worked with and led initiatives with medical societies, patient advocacy groups, governmental agencies, public and private insurance companies, investor relations, capital funding, strategic planning, and quality and lean production. He has also led companies through sales processes to new ownership and into public markets through an IPO. Ken started his career at 2 large multinational companies, Biomed and Stryker, where he held positions of increasing responsibility in sales, product management, and marketing. Ken then gained general management experience at Smith & Nephew prior to taking on his first CEO role in 2010 at Trans One, driving a turnaround strategy. He then became CEO of Clinical Innovations and led that company through a successful exit after 5 years while doubling the business in size and value. In 2020, he became CEO of Bioventus and led them through an IPO while increasing the size of the business by 80% through strategic M&A. Ken currently serves on a number of board of directors in the MedTech sector and also donates his time serving on the board of directors of AdvaMed, the National Italian-American Foundation, and Valparaiso University College of Business, where he achieved his undergraduate degree. Ken lives in Walla Walla, Washington, where Reali Family Vineyard is based. Ken Reali, welcome into the corner office.
Thank you, Brent. Great to be here with you today.
Now, where do we find you on this glorious day?
In Walla Walla, Washington.
Walla, that's right. Way up north.
Yep, in the Pacific Northwest, southeastern Washington. This is a big agricultural community, and we have about 140 vineyards here, and my wife and I started one here several years ago, so we're excited to be part of this community.
Can't wait to get into that. As we talked the other day, I love the fact that multiple time CEO decides, you know what, it's time to go to the vineyard, right? It reminds me of George Washington, right? And his, no, I'm not going to run for another term. I'm just going to go find my piece of mine under the fig leaves or the wine leaves in this, or the wine berries in this case. But you want to hear all about that. But we're going to start a little bit earlier than that. And I don't think you're originally from Washington, but we're going to hear a little bit of that. Love to hear about your early years, where you grew up and what your early family life was like.
Sounds great, Brent. Well, I'm a Midwestern guy. I was born in the Chicago area, south suburbs. So I'm a Chicago White Sox fan for those that think about Chicago as a divided city. But I lived there until about junior high, and my parents got divorced, and my mother and stepfather moved us to Warsaw, Indiana. Now, those that know Warsaw, it's the orthopedic capital of the world. And I went kicking and screaming, obviously, to moving from the Chicago suburbs to a small town in Indiana. now when I look back on it many years later, I have that to thank for getting me into the medical device area of business. I never would have probably even thought about medical devices if I had not moved to Warsaw and was exposed to the orthopedic companies at that time. And that's a story that I can share here in a minute of how that happened. But I grew up in a household with an older sister who was just about a year older than me, and then a half brother and half sister that were quite a bit younger than me, 9 years and 12 years younger than me. So it was a very good environment to grow up. I had a very happy childhood, and really had a very loving mother who was very supportive, and I credit as being until I met my wife, my biggest cheerleader, and really gave me the confidence to go forward in my early years.
Awesome. And did she work from the home or have an outside job? What was her career?
So growing up, she was really a classic homemaker. Neither one of my parents or my stepfather went to college. I'm actually a first generation college graduate in my family. My older sister and I, and she stayed home and really focused on raising us, and was terrific at it. She did work later in life, but at that point in time, she was a homemaker. And my stepfather worked at a printing company, which is what brought us to Warsaw, Indiana. Right. And, he really instilled in me, largely through observation, a very strong work ethic, and worked extremely hard to provide for his family. And that was something I always appreciated about him, and what he did to ensure we had everything that we would want, pretty much in a pretty typical middle-class environment.
From that point on, once your mother got remarried, were you pretty much full-time with your stepdad and your mom?
Yes, that's correct. Yep.
Got it. And what were some of the other early kind of inspirations through your childhood, remembering growing up in Warsaw? We'll get to the MedTech industry in a minute, but, was that something that you aspired to at an early age, or what kind of things were you interested in?
Not at all. In fact, I hated blood. I wouldn't have even thought of going into surgeries or anything like that. In fact, I started out in school not doing well. I was pretty immature from, call it, early grade school until about the fourth grade. And actually, my aunt, who was a speech pathologist, had to tutor me between my third grade and fourth grade year. And all of a sudden, for me, and maybe it was my own maturity, everything clicked. And I remember going into class in my fourth grade, and after a few weeks, my teacher looked at me and says, "What's happened to you?" Wow. Because I was probably a C student, and I all of a sudden became an A student. And I really credit my aunt at that point, and my mother, who forced me during the summer to stay in. I remember this very distinctly, from 9 o'clock to 12 o'clock every day, doing and catching up on things that I missed early in my childhood, just because I was probably cared more about being outside playing at that point. So I wasn't a good student, but I did become a good student, and actually enjoyed school and really reading quite a bit. And reading has always been a big part of my life. Various books, and that's really helped me tremendously in my career as well.
Was it some sort of dyslexia, or what was it, did the pathologist work on?
No dyslexia. Nothing I can blame on anything other than probably my own immaturity as a kid. And once my aunt sat down and really explained things to me one-on-one, and maybe that's what I needed at that point in my life, reading became second nature, and everything kind of clicked. And I really credit her. To this day, we laugh about it now, but I said, you really helped me out when I was at that age, 7, 8 years old, 9 years old, to get the facts straight and springboard my academic career at that point.
Wow, what a blessing, huh? To have that in your life.
Yes,
That's terrific.
yes,
That's terrific.
absolutely.
And then outside of class, you obviously had some interests: sports, music, theater. What kind of things did you find yourself doing after class?
Yes, largely sports, and I played every sport you could think of. And I was always the kid that got the most improved player award. I was never the standout athlete. I remember in baseball distinctly playing Little League baseball, and it was a extra inning game, and the ball was hit to me in the outfield, and everybody kind of held their breath, thinking, would I catch it or not? Because if I caught it, it would end the game. I ended up catching the ball. I don't know how, and I remember being mobbed by my teammates, and I think I got the most improved player award. But I can think of like 4 or 5 times I got that for baseball, basketball, football. The sport that I really ended up gravitating to, because I was seen to be better at, was tennis, and ended up playing tennis really starting in high school all the way through, and was a pretty good tennis player as I progressed in my high school years.
Awesome. And did you have ambitions of going further with that into college or elsewhere with your tennis?
I did not. When I thought about college, it was more focused at that point on academics. I didn't really consider taking my tennis beyond high school at that point.
Right. Now, I believe you went to Valparaiso, and was that your
Valparaiso?
First school? Yeah. Tell us a little bit about the selection of that school.
Yeah, Brent, it was not my first choice, and actually, this leads into how I ended up into medical device and specifically orthopedics early in my career. My goal was the Air Force Academy, and it was a dual reason. Number one, I was fascinated with flying, and having the opportunity to do that was a high motivation. And it was also free education. At that point, my parents could not afford to send me to college, so I knew I had to pay my way, however it was, through loans, scholarships, or grants. So I went through a process to get nominated by my local congressman, and through that process, I met some of the executives at Biomed. I'll never forget this, because it was such a disappointment. I was accepted into the Air Force Academy, but then when I went for my physical, I had a curve in my spine, my cervical spine, which nobody ever picked up on. It was a 12-degree curve, and they medically disqualified me. And I was at 18 years old, it was the biggest disappointment in my life at that point in time. And I remember the guys at Biomed felt so bad for me. They said, look, go to college, and if you ever are interested in a career in this industry, let us know. We're always looking for smart people. And so I went to Valparaiso, and I went there largely motivated by money. I got the best academic scholarships there and grants, and it allowed me to go there without taking on too much student loan. I did have some student loans, but not too much. Right. And it was about an hour and a half down the road. So I went there, and that ended up being a great decision, and one that I still look back on and as a great time in my life, and a time of growth and maturity and learning, both inside and outside the classroom.
And then Biomed became your first employer.
It did not.
Oh, it did not.
Actually,
okay.
No. I was not. I did not pursue Biomed right away. I actually worked for a small hydraulic and electronic repair company, selling into the steel mills in Northwest Indiana at the time, and injection molding companies as well in the state of Michigan. So that was my early experience, and it was kind of a industrial sales type of job. I did that for 2 years because I wanted to see if I would like sales. I wanted to just get my feet wet and get some experience. And then after 2 years doing that, I contacted the executives I knew at Biomet. And one thing led to another. I had to call him several times, I remember. He did get back to me right away.
Who are you again?
Yeah, exactly.
6 years, 7 years by that time, right?
Exactly. At that point, it had been 6 or 7 years, but he did remember me, and I got an opportunity. It's like anything else. The door got cracked open a little bit, and I made the most of it, and started my career at Biomet. Ended up moving shortly after that to a subsidiary of Biomet called EBI Medical, where I was a direct sales rep in the trauma area, as well as selling bone growth stimulators into the office. It was a great job, and I did that for my first 5 years in my career.
May I ask why you didn't go to Biomet in the beginning? Was there some shyness involved? Kind of like, well, I don't know if they were serious or not, or did you truly want to try another industry before perhaps contacting?
It's a great question, Brent, and I wanted to try another industry. I just wanted to try some other things. I had some internships during the summers in my college career, and I hadn't tried this industrial sales area. I had started out in engineering, and then I shifted my major to business. So I wanted to find something that was maybe a little more technical, that leveraged that a little bit. So I thought I'd try that. And really, what motivated me to finally call Biomet is the company was having some financial problems. It was a small company. And I remember that really shook me up. I was like, wow, this isn't good. I remember they cut our salaries, and I got commissions and salaries, and that was really like, wow, this is a little shaky. And I remember talking to my wife, and I said, I'm going to call Biomet now. I'm going to give this a shot and see if I can get my foot in the door there. So,
good call. Good call. Well, you spent 7-8 years there, and is that where you first started managing people, or did you have some exposure to that in your previous job?
No, I did not, and believe it or not, I did not manage people at Biomet. So I started in sales, and I was a sales trainer. So I would help. After I was successful there for a few years, I became a field trainer. So all the new reps, many of them would come to me, and I would spend time in the field and show them the ropes and really educate them. So that was kind of pseudo management, I would suppose. And then I actually moved my family at the time into the corporate office at EBI Medical, which was in Parsippany, New Jersey. And this was really the moment that put me on my pathway to become a CEO. And it was a major decision because I was making really good income. It was a great time in my life from that perspective. It allowed me to pay off all my student loans. But I really didn't see myself long term in sales. I just felt there was something more, and I wanted to stretch myself. I didn't know where at the time. I didn't have my eye on being a CEO. It was just more, I wanted to try something different. So I became a product manager at EBI Medical and moved my family from, at that point, South Bend, Indiana, to the Parsippany, New Jersey area. And I took a $100,000 a year pay cut. This was in 1996.
Wow.
Fortunately, I always told my wife at the time, I said, look, if I fail at this, which I very likely could, I said, I always can go back and sell. I said, I know I can get a sales job.
Right. Well, and that was a good call. And so was it a change of company then too, or was it another division?
No, still the same division. EBI was a subsidiary of Biomet, so I just moved from a sales rep at EBI to a product manager. I was, I think, probably in the history of the company, the only person that ever did that, because it was a very different situation economically, especially. Sure. But I've always had this attitude. And it's overall served me well that I've never made decisions based on money. I've really looked at it based on opportunity. But that's sometimes very hard to do. But I knew I could still. I had two daughters at the time. My third one had not been born yet. She was born in New Jersey, and I knew I could. My wife and I could make it through. It would be some sacrifices, but we did it.
Great story. I love it. And then went on to Stryker from there. Is that right? Was that your next
Yes.
story?
Yeah. And then after 2 more years at EBI at Biomet, I was recruited to Stryker, and moved up to the Boston area, which is where I worked, out of Hopkinton. There was an office in Hopkinton at the time for Stryker, and started as a senior product manager and developing a new technology in spine. So it really leveraged my experience at EBI, where I was a spine product manager, and then went and did something a little more revolutionary at Stryker. And that's where, to answer your earlier question, where I started managing people about a year into my role at Stryker.
What were some of those earlier challenges when you started managing folks and leading them?
I made a lot of the typical mistakes of a new manager. Micromanaging, not delegating enough, not trusting your people, maybe some mishires as well along the way. I think back in those early years, and I did a lot of the typical things. And fortunately, Stryker has such a great culture. I got a lot of great feedback. Feedback from my managers, feedback from 360 reviews, where my team would give me feedback directly or, confidentially, but directly on how to improve my management style. So those first few years were instrumental in that. And I always look back on that and think about the mentors I had, or the great bosses I had at Stryker, including John Brown, who I got to know pretty well when he was CEO at Stryker, and this was towards the end of his tenure at Stryker, and some others that I worked with that just were terrific in guiding me and giving me great feedback. But I made a lot of the same mistakes that you always read about with new managers. It was, and one of the things I've always done that helped as well is read. And this is probably the time in the late 90s when I started reading business books, books on management and leadership, and principles that I could really hone in on and apply my own style to. So that then became a lifelong event for me, where every year I'd read maybe 8 to 10 new business books on leadership management. And some of them were really impactful, some not as much. It just depended on the book. But I really have used that as a self-learning tool that, when I think back, was a critical part of my growth. Of course, working with good people and a good environment helps, but investing in yourself and self-learning was a critical piece for me.
Did you ever think about going back and getting an MBA or a master's degree? And if not, why not?
I had started that when I was a sales rep. I was literally probably 30 to 40% through. And I got the opportunity to become a product manager and move to New Jersey. And I remember having that discussion with my manager at the time. And he's like, well, you've got a choice. So he said, you can either go get experience, real life experience, or stay and get your MBA and hope that experience opportunity comes later. And he said, it may or may not. He said, this is a bird in the hand, so to speak. And I remember him really, because I really was debating that at the time, Brent. Do I just stick around and do what I'm doing? And I was at an IU campus at the time, Indiana University, and getting that part-time. And obviously I chose not to continue, and I went and got the experience, the practical experience. Now, Stryker, when I was at Stryker and I was getting into management and leadership positions, they sent me to a couple courses, one at Harvard in particular, Harvard Business School.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. that was a terrific course that I really enjoyed, but never really regretted not finishing my MBA, but it was something that I had worked on. Just my career at that point got in the way of that.
Well, it sounds like you had some really good mentors along the way, both internally
Yes.
as well as externally. Have you found that mentoring yourself has been something that you've enjoyed and stepped into later in your career?
You know, I enjoy it very much. And at this stage of my career where I'm no longer an active CEO and more of a board chairman and director, I enjoy it more so. I love to mentor and give back, having been through a lot of different experiences in my career, both good and bad. And as a CEO through many different types of situations, I do feel, I have something to offer. I don't always have the perfect example or situation that I can relate to, but I think a CEO really needs confidence. It's a lonely job. It's a job that you can't always go to a colleague or a direct report and talk about certain things. So having board members and directors that really have your best interest in mind, as well as the company's best interest, I found has been a terrific avenue. So I enjoy that role, and certainly reflect on the chairman in particular that I've worked with, who have just been terrific for me as I've been a CEO, and working with them and really bending their ear on certain topics, certain critical areas, critical to the company, or certain problems or issues we were going through at the time.
Now, you spent the better part of 30 years in operational roles in MedTech, pretty much all in MedTech. I'm not sure about the Smith & Nephew, whether that was MedTech or not, but you certainly have done it. And now, of course, still involved in advisory positions, and we're going to get to the Vineyard in a minute. But when did you know, Ken, that was really the career in the sector for you? Because typically some folks, early in the career, they may change around a little bit. Well, you did, right? Your first job was on the industrial side before you came in. Was there a defining moment somewhere in your career where you said, wow, I just love this field and, can't wait to continue to grow and learn more with it and take on more responsibility within it?
Brent, it was very early on, and I never looked back. And I remember being in a training class early in my career at Biomed, and it was all experienced salespeople at the time. So this was a training class, and I remember it was very specific on hip replacements, and it was a week and a half course. We had an exam every day, and I just remember thinking, I'm just going to hibernate in my hotel room at night. I'm going to learn this stuff, and I'm going to see where things end up and see how I like it. And I ended up being, and this was probably a monumental thing that gave me a lot of confidence at the time, second in my class out of 30 people, and I was the least experienced. And I really attribute that to my dedicated efforts and hard work. But that after I did that, I was like, this is the career path for me. I can see a pathway, and I didn't know what that looked like exactly, and certainly had no aspirations of being a CEO at that point. But I saw myself as, this is a good fit. I can do this, and I can hopefully do it well for a long period of time.
Kind of sounds like when you set your mind to something, that kind of becomes it. You stay on that straight and narrow. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement. Yes, that's been overall a strength, I would say.
With some corrective action, an aunt that comes in or a boss that kind of gives you a few words, but that's great. It's a terrific quality. Speaking of becoming a CEO, Baxano Surgical was your first CEO position, but I think you came there as a COO. So when you came in, was it kind of like, you're on deck to come in here, or was that a position that you really had to kind of fight for and earn, given that maybe there was some competition from either internal or external candidates?
Yeah, it's a great question, Brent. When I came in, I was obviously had never been a CEO before. I had been a general manager at Smith & Nephew of a medical device business. So I had general management experience and knew a lot of the inner workings of how to run a business at that point in time. But had never been a CEO. So it was really a trial process. There was a founder CEO, and this was a struggling company. And I can get to that here in a minute because I think that's an important part of my story. This was a struggling company with declining sales. And I came in to try to help salvage it if we could at the time. And it started out as Trans One, and then we did some acquisitions, and it turned into Baxano Surgical. So with good performance, I did earn the CEO role after my first year, to your point, and the founder retired at the time and became a part of the board. So it was a good transition, but it wasn't something, to your point, that was promised. It was just, let's see how you do leadership-wise, how you work with the team, and, a lot of the skills that I've learned as a CEO, building a cohesive executive team, the clarity of alignment with that executive team, and the communication, over communicating, and obviously having the right human resource systems that support that clarity and support people's growth at the company were all developed in that climate and that company. But it was a very difficult situation because it was a business that was not growing. And frankly, what happened is we ended up, after 4 to 5 years of trying and salvaging the company through acquisitions and financing, we ended up having to sell the company through bankruptcy. And I went down with the ship, so to speak. I was the last person to leave that company after selling off pieces of it. And it was like my wife always says that was like a death for you, because I remember walking the halls of this company and nobody left. And it was just such a difficult time for me. And frankly, I thought I was done as a CEO. I thought my first CEO role was very humbling, was going to be my last. And lo and behold, it was not. And really, my whole board at the time was a terrific reference for me, and they really stood by me. And I took a few months to really recalibrate myself and really decide that I even want to be into CEO again. Did I have the drive? Did I have the talent and the skill? And that's when I was hired by Clinical Innovations and moved from orthopedics for the first time into women's health, which at the time I was not sure I was qualified for. But the people that hired me insisted I was, and that ended up being a strong success. But it was, but going through that period with my first CEO role I learned a lot. And it was a real difficult time. And I really credit my board at the time, my board chairman, really supporting me and making me understand that this wasn't something that was my fault. It was the circumstances. And they really respected the fact that I never left and I went down with the ship, so to speak.
Looking at that transition from your first to your second CEO, and just for our listeners, there's been 3 times. There's a trifecta here. We'll get to that in a minute.
Yes.
But on that second CEO, what do you think were the key lessons that you took away from the Baxano, closed down, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, bankruptcy, that you think best helped you in your application and leadership in that new role?
Well, it was a lot of, first of all, you have to have the products and the momentum and growth in a business, and you can't underestimate the value of that. When I stepped into my first CEO role in a declining business, I probably underestimated what it would take to really turn the business around. And sometimes it's just not in the cards, so when I was looking for my next role, Brent, it was really about, okay, let's find a company that's stable
Right.
has a good foundation, that's profitable. I really picked and choose. I didn't want to step into another turnaround situation, because actually what I did learn as well is I'm not a turnaround CEO. I don't think I want to do that again.
Yeah, right.
I'm more of a growth CEO. I like driving growth. But turning a business around and is sometimes extremely stressful. It gave me more gray hair than probably any other role from that perspective. So
But it also
I did
helped from a
learn.
pre-selection standpoint, right? So
Yes.
you want to go with a company that had growth potential, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I did learn that not all CEO roles are the same. You've got to look
Right.
at them critically and think about it critically and think about your qualities of what you're good at and what you enjoy and make sure there's a fit. And I would say that was probably a huge factor for me. When I was recruited to Clinical Innovations, I was recruited with a process actually developed by G.H. Smart, which is a book called Top Grading. And they had a profile and a scorecard of exactly the type of CEO that they needed to run this company. And I was interviewed to that. And I actually liked that process so much that I went to and did a course myself. And since that time, for my last two CEO roles at Clinical Innovations and then Bioventus, I used that process myself to recruit my executive team because I found it very, very compelling in how you really isolate candidates that are best suited for the job that you need.
Yeah.
Not the job they did before or the job, but the job that you need at the company today. And you've really got to articulate that well and understand it well when you're recruiting. And that taught me a lot.
Find the best horse for the course, so to speak.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so I've never been a bring my own team kind of CEO. I've always looked at companies, and I look at who's there. Obviously, my preference is always to work with the team that's already there. But if I do have to go outside, which invariably you do, and recruit someone new, it's really looking at it and saying, well, what do we really need? And most times it's not someone you've worked with before necessarily, which a lot of people, that's their go-to. It's new talent. And frankly, I've considered that a strength of mine, is being able to recruit new talent into a company and develop that talent or bring it in and with people that will provide new perspective and really add to the organization.
Now, you were about 5 years with Clinical Innovations before going to Bioventus. Tell us about that transition.
Yes.
Was there an exit at that stage, or something that attracted you to Bioventus?
Correct. Yeah, well, at Clinical Innovations, we were owned by private equity. And the first private equity firm, Pritzker Group, who recruited me, we got the business really humming after about 2.5 years. And by that, I mean double-digit growth. We've done some acquisitions. We had a great executive team. And they came to me and said, Ken, well, what do you think about selling the business? And I said, well, what do you think? And they said, well, we think it's a good time. They had owned the business at that point for 7 years. Right. And so we ran a sales process, and this would have been in 2017. And that process led to selling the company to EQT, which is one of the largest private equity firms based out of Stockholm, Sweden. Right. And we all stayed on after the sales process with EQT and really just kept driving the business. EQT made some great investments, allowed us to expand into new markets into Asia and other areas, continued our business development process. And 2.5 years after that, we got an amazing offer for more than double what we sold it for from Pritzker Group to EQT. Wow. And that was to a strategic at the time, Laborie, and we closed on that right before the pandemic started in February of 2020. And I remember no one had any idea what was coming our way. Yeah. But we really pushed to get it closed. I remember the bankers and EQT saying speed's always important. Just let's get this closed. And we're so glad in retrospect we did, obviously, because who knows what it would have happened if we would have, if the closing would have been delayed. But we successfully closed in February of 2020. I was contacted during the closing process because we had announced the acquisition in December by a recruiter for Bioventus, and I knew Bioventus because actually the business that Bioventus was the business that I ran as a general manager at Smith and Nephew, and I was, in a way, they were recruiting me back. And the goal, which was intriguing to me, at first I was a little reticent about thinking about returning to a business that I had been involved in leading at that point 15 years earlier in my career, but they were really looking to take the company public, and that was intriguing to me. I also saw ways that the business could be grown through acquisition. And the combination was too enticing to pass up. So I started in April of 2020 with Bioventus after closing on Clinical Innovations in February, right in the middle of the pandemic and the shutdown. And I remember starting in Salt Lake City. I was living in Salt Lake City at the time, where Clinical Innovations was, in my basement, starting and meeting everyone remotely for largely the first 4 to 5 months of my tenure there, which was challenging in itself because of the circumstances of the pandemic at the time.
Yeah, gosh, crazy. And then somewhere along the way, Reali Family Vineyard was born. So how did that come about?
Yes. So that was in 2016, Brent, and my wife and I were, we had just sent our last daughter, our youngest girl, off to college, and this was September of 2016. And we looked at each other and said, "Gosh, what are we going to do?" We're not golfers. We're not, we're outdoor people. At that point, we were living in Salt Lake City, and we loved the West. We realized we really loved the Western U.S. Having grown up in the Midwest, both of us, and living on the East Coast and the Southeast, we really loved the weather in the West, and we were on a trip to Napa Valley at the time. And this is a total true story. We were sitting on a vineyard, drinking a bottle of wine, and we looked at each other and said, "We could do this. We could easily do this."
I love it.
And I got to say, it was, one more bottle of wine. Now, obviously, the reality is you can't romanticize this at all. And, reality hit the next morning, and we kind of looked at it and said, did we really mean that last night? And we decided we did. And we actually started looking at areas around the country that we could do this. And so we looked at, obviously, Napa, Sonoma, Paso Robles, even upstate New York in the Finger Lakes area where they have Riesling, Willamette Valley, which is in Oregon, and Walla Walla. And we had a criteria of things that we were looking for. And at that point, we had lived all over the country. We had a good perspective on what we wanted. We had never picked a location to live until this time. It had always been picked based on the best opportunity in my career, and that's really what drove it more than anything. Even though my wife was a successful speech pathologist, it always was my job that pretty much drove where we lived. And that's when we found Walla Walla, and we found the property in the late 2020, early 21 era, and bought the property and started developing it into a vineyard. It had been a wheat field for 100 years, but there were 2 vineyards next to it, and we had the soil, the terroir, really tested to make sure that we could grow grapes here. And we started that process, and I was still working full time at that point with Bioventus, and my wife really retired as a speech pathologist, and she took on developing the infrastructure of our vineyard and getting everything going, from finding a vineyard management team to taking courses herself She went off and went to school and did
Wow.
also some internships, and really, I give her a tremendous amount of credit. So when I was ready to move on and exit Bioventus, I was able to jump right into our vineyard and winery business, largely because my wife had set it up and worked, and she was obviously very excited for me to be more involved, but she had really gotten it going at that point. Brent.
What's your wife's name?
Kristen.
We're going to have to get Kristen on the podcast, I think. I want to hear this story. I gave the Reali family vineyard going. I love that. What was kind of the impetus, or, when did you finally make the decision that you're going to go do this full time and leave that last CEO role?
Yeah, it was a tough one, and we knew our vineyard was going to be planted in the spring of last year. And we saw just the back and forth between, we were living in North Carolina at the time, back and forth between North Carolina and Washington State, Walla Walla. And it was just getting really hard and hard to manage. So it was a decision that really the timing was the right one, all the way around. Personally, professionally, for the business, it was just the right step to take at that point in time.
And for the family, and for the two of you, right? Because she's getting
and
into
for
this
the two
new
of
us,
us,
and she's been following you all these years, right? So it's only fair.
Exactly, Brent. Exactly. And I, she has been a terrific support for me. And at that point, and this is something we wanted to do together. And I felt, well, I wasn't going to live up to my end of the bargain if I didn't really dive in and do this with her. So
now you told me a little earlier, I guess, that you're not producing this year. How far off are you before wine will be made, and what will be your varietals?
Yes, well, so actually we will produce this year, but we're going to be buying our grapes from other vineyards, local vineyards here. So we do have a winemaker, and we'll be producing. But next year, Brent, we'll have our first harvest. So 2025 on our vineyard. And so Reali is Italian, and my ancestors are from Tuscany in Italy. And this has always been very close to my heart. The Realis came over here with nothing, and I've actually just received my Italian citizenship and passport, and I know my family in Italy, and been to the village in Tuscany where my ancestors and my grandparents are from, and had a wonderful time. So our varietals are a tribute. Part of our varietals are a tribute to them. We have 3 Italian varietals, and then 5 other varietals that are more French-based. So Italian and French wines is what we're going to focus on. We ended up hiring a winemaker with 20 years of experience, who's originally from France, believe it or not, and is very excited as well to make Italian-based wine as well. And we're very fortunate, and one of the things I've learned as a CEO is you surround yourself with highly talented people, and that are complementary to you. And we certainly found that in our winemaker, and pretty excited and feel very fortunate. And it was serendipitous in many ways to get him on board.
And you'll be doing both whites and reds, the Montepulciano and the Pinot Grigio equivalents, or
correct.
Yeah.
Yep. Whites and reds, Chardonnay, Sauv Blanc, Vermentino, which is a white Italian grape, we grow as well. And then, of course, the reds from Italian, Sangiovese, Barbera, and, of course, Cab Sauv and Malbec, Cab Franc are some of our reds.
Wow. Can't wait. Great. Well, Ken, we're way over time here. It's just been such a fascinating story. I've enjoyed the conversation. But we always have one last question, though, we ask all our CEO guests, and that's, what kind of career and life advice would you give someone that, has their eyes on their own corner office, as you've done someday, or as well become an entrepreneur and really follow their dreams?
It's a great question, and I would end this and answer that question this way. First of all, you have to have the energy and belief in yourself, and that is critical. It's a gut check, because any leadership role has extreme responsibility, and you have to take that seriously. But I would also add this. Your career is not a sprint, it's a marathon. Yeah. And treat it that way. Make decisions that are career decisions that are going to put yourself in the best possible situation to become a leader or a CEO. And that includes volunteering for projects that might seem a stretch for you. And those are things I always did early in my career that gave me opportunities to continue to climb the ladder, so to speak. Not be afraid of challenges, not be afraid of failure, and take those opportunities on.
Our guest today is Ken Reali. He helps run, with his wife, a family-owned vineyard dedicated to growing and producing premier wines that are terroir-driven. I think that's how it's pronounced.
Terroir-driven, yes.
Terroir-driven. Reali Family Vineyard is profound beauty in the shadows of the Blue Mountains with diverse microclimates in the northern Walla Walla area in Washington. Ken, thank you so much for sharing your journey into the corner office.
Thank you, Brent. Enjoyed it very much. Have a great day.
Thank you for listening to Into the Corner Office with Brant Hanley. We hope you enjoyed hearing our guest CEO story as much as we did. If you want to hear more CEOs reveal their journey into the corner office, please subscribe via iTunes and tell your friends and colleagues. For more information about Brant, Resource Options International, and the mighty middle market, visit www.goforroi.com. We look forward to having you join us for our next episode.